Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Maple Conservative Girl podcast. My name is Danica, and today I am talking about climate politics, net zero, affordability, and the growing disconnect between what global elites like Mark Carney are telling Canadians and what Canadians are actually experiencing in real life. I'm going to talk about the UN-backed climate community quietly moving away from the infamous worst-case scenario known as RCP 8.5, why conservatives are saying fear-based climate politics went way too far, and why Canada is still doubling down on net zero policies while affordability keeps getting worse, partly because of these net zero policies. I'll also get into Prime Minister Mark Carney's comments on affordability, the growing debt crisis facing Canadians, tensions inside the Liberal Party over energy policy, and finally, Bill C-22 and the concerns surrounding privacy and government power in the digital age. So if you like this episode, please subscribe and share with somebody who you think might benefit from listening to this, and let's get right into it. So last Friday, I talked about how Carney is doubling the electricity grid by 2050 and how really, I think it's irresponsible for him and his government to be forcing a net zero agenda down our throats. And at the same time, something very interesting happened internationally.
But we're not letting this happen in America. In 1982, the executive director of the United Nations Environmental Program predicted that by the year 2000, change would cause a global catastrophe. He said that it will be irreversible as any nuclear holocaust would be. This is what they said at the United Nations. What happened? Here we are. Another UN official stated in 1989 that within a decade, entire nations could be wiped off the map by global warming. Not happening. You know, it used to be global cooling. If you look back years ago in the 1920s and the 1930s, they said, global cooling will kill the world. We have to do something. Then they said global warming will kill the world. But then it started getting cooler. So now they could just call it climate change because that way they can't miss climate change. Because if it goes higher or lower, whatever the hell happens, there's climate change. It's the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world.
The United Nations-backed climate community quietly began moving away from one of the most extreme climate scenarios ever pushed onto the public, RCP 8.5. Now, if you've followed climate politics over the past decade, you've probably seen headlines warning about catastrophic warming, societal collapse, food shortages, mass extinction, flooded cities, and economic devastation. I remember when I was in elementary school, my teachers made us watch An Inconvenient Truth from Al Gore, this documentary basically became mandatory viewing for an entire generation of students. And if you grew up in the 2000s, you probably remember this too. The film was presented almost like settled prophecy. We were told that the polar ice caps were disappearing immediately, sea levels were about to catastrophically rise, cities would be underwater, and that humanity was approaching disaster unless governments drastically changed society. For a lot of kids like myself, it genuinely created anxiety. Now again, to be fair, we do need to take care of the planet, and we want to. But critics, like conservatives, have spent years pointing out that many predictions in that era relied heavily on worst-case modeling assumptions and dramatic presentation tactics. And what's interesting is that even some of the claims associated with that period became controversial later on because timelines and projections didn't actually unfold exactly as they were originally presented, which was fear-based. A huge amount of those headlines were built around this scenario called RCP 8.5. And what exactly is that? It's essentially the worst-case scenario climate pathway. The climate apocalypse scenario, the idea that the world would keep massively increasing fossil fuels forever with no intervention at all. For years, this scenario was repeatedly treated in media coverage and politics as if it was like for sure going to happen in the future, that we'd all perish because of warming. And like if you didn't drink from if you drank from a plastic straw, you don't care about the future of this planet. And now, scientists involved in the next generation of UN climate modeling are calling these assumptions increasingly, basically implausible. And this is big because politicians around the world, including here in Canada, our own net zero loving Prime Minister, these kinds of governments use these worst case projections to justify massive government intervention in the economy. Carbon taxes, net zero mandates, restrictions on oil and gas, higher electricity costs, energy regulations, massive subsidy programs to incentivize people to go towards electrification because the earth will burn. Remember 2 summers ago when the Conservatives were pushing for the Liberals to axe the gas tax so that Canadians couldn't go on their summer road trip, and Mark Collins said this?
Good news, kids. You can take a summer fun time vacation where you're locked in a car for 10 consecutive days, nonstop with no bathroom breaks, and the Conservatives have a plan for you to have that summertime fun. And the cost? Give up the future of the planet, right? Don't worry, kids, about climate change. Don't worry about taking action on the planet. Enjoy your 10 hours in the car and let the planet burn.
What a loser. Canadians can't go on their summer road trip with their family because if they do, they despise this planet. Have some respect for the planet, you Canadians, while they literally jet set around the world burning 100 times more carbon into the air than the average Canadian. Talk about virtue signaling. Canadians are constantly being told that these policies are super necessary because we are headed towards a climate catastrophe unless governments radically transform society immediately. And that's what you see them doing. If the Liberal government actually cared about the planet, Mark Carney wouldn't have walked back the 2 billion tree project by 2030 implemented by Trudeau. He would have ramped it up. By the way, because of this program, taxpayers have spent almost $500 million with a B on this project, which they only planted like 11% of their target, not even 500,000 trees. But we've spent $500 million on this failed project. But actually, that could be something that would actually help, like planting trees. I mean, it would be great. They absorb carbon dioxide. If they actually cared about climate change, if they actually cared, they would be buying water bombers built in Alberta to help with the wildfires that do happen in Canada. Like, do they really care about the planet? Or are they just all virtue signaling about being good citizens and basically telling us that we have to be impoverished by their policies for the future of our grandkids? And anybody who disagrees is an idiot or a bad person. Anyways, now even climate scientists are quietly backing away from the scenario that drove so much of that fear messaging. Donald Trump reacted exactly how you'd expect him with a great post on Truth Social. He says, "Good riddance. After 15 years of Democrats with a U, promising that climate change is going to destroy the planet, the United Nations Top Climate Committee just admitted that its own projections, RCP 8.5, were wrong. For far too long, climate activism has been used by Democrats to scare Americans, push horrible energy policies, and fund billions into their bogus research programs. Unlike the Democrats who use climate alarmism nonsense to push their Green New scam, my administration will always be based on truth, science, and fact." Now, to be fair and factually accurate here, the UN did not say climate change is fake. It remains real, and even scientists criticizing RCP 8.5 still support climate action and So do conservatives. Problem that conservatives have with this whole issue is that why do we have to impoverish our country when we have massive wealth under our feet and when China is still running on coal? Shouldn't we be working to get them onto something cleaner, such as Canadian energy? And conservatives are asking a very legitimate question right now. If the most catastrophic scenarios pushed onto the public for years are now considered unrealistic or implausible, then why is Canada still aggressively restructuring its economy around net zero at any and all costs? I mean, the cost of affordability. I said last episode, they will literally destroy our economy for this green stuff, the carbon taxes, the mandates, all of their net zero policies. Like, it's not working yet. You know, if you gently give us options, then maybe it will slowly, naturally shift, but you're shoving it down our throats and not caring about our affordability and the economy, and we don't want it. I mean, look at what's happening with all of these EV battery plants that are shutting down, these projects that are being subsidized by the government being canceled, and at this point we're quite frankly disgusted by it. We want to use the plastic straw just to piss you off. You know what I mean? Like, you push us to do it. It just won't work if you're pushing us to do it. Like, we don't like to be pushed, especially if it means sending us all into poverty for this green agenda. And more than that, like, do these governments care about climate action? Like, they want us to be good citizens, but I mean, they're jet setting around the world. Mark Carney burned like 500 tons of fossil fuels just in 1 year, and the average Canadian burns like 5. Why are Canadians paying higher electricity bills, higher fuel costs, and higher costs of living while Ottawa keeps talking about doubling the electricity grid by 2050 and forcing a massive energy transition decades into the future? Why aren't they focused on what's happening right now? Right now, people are lined up at the food banks. Right now, people can't afford their homes. Right now, people are living in the streets. Right now, people are working 3 jobs just to be able to put a roof over their heads. Right now, single moms cannot be single moms because they can't afford it. And honestly, they are straight up gaslighting us, because for years anyone questioning these assumptions was treated like a science denier or an extremist. Now suddenly the same institutions are quietly revising the assumptions themselves. And here in Canada, what's the response from the political class? Double down. More net zero, more regulations, more attack on oil and gas. I mean, they came out with this pipeline deal, but I mean, it's not going to happen, okay? A pipeline is not going to get built with Mark Carney as our Prime Minister. It's just not going to happen. If he wanted it to happen, he would get out of the way and let it happen, but he's making it like hard. He's making it like, what investor is going to want to jump through all these hoops that Mark Carney has created for these investors? Like, nobody wants to invest in Canada, okay? Especially when America is like on the other end of the border. They talk about, more clean electricity transformation plans, more expensive energy policy. Meanwhile, Canadians are struggling to afford groceries, housing, and utilities right now. So what are you doing about that? Nothing. They're only focused about, what's going to happen in 2050, when who the hell knows what's going to happen in 2050? Conservatives are not saying to ignore the environment. What conservatives are saying, what rational people are saying, is this: public policy should be based on realism, affordability, and balanced risk assessments, not permanent fear campaigns and worst-case scenario politics. When we elect somebody to represent us in the government, they should be doing exactly that. They should be representing us. They should be working for us. Instead, they're working for themselves. Canada is an energy producing country. We have natural resources, we have oil, gas, hydro, mining, and nuclear potential. We have so much potential. And the government is just like blocking us from reaching our full potential. We should be focused on affordability, energy independence, and economic competitiveness, not punishing Canadians endlessly in pursuit of ideological climate targets while the underlying assumptions are already being revised internationally.
Has not only committed to a higher industrial price than it has right now, but it's also committed to net zero by 2050. So he obviously believes that he is getting something in return here that was not really on the table before when it comes to Alberta. I think it remains to be seen, though, too, David, how that unfolds inside his party.
Yes.
There was a briefing for MPs last night for all MPs. There were a lot of questions, many of which you asked the minister, Minister Debrugen, and there were no answers for MPs at that briefing either in terms of what happens to the emissions. There was a climate caucus meeting that was supposed to happen today where some of the people who are really worried about what happens to climate change, we're going to have a conversation about what this means for them. I don't know that anyone will go so far as what we saw Stephen Guilbeault do when he left cabinet around this very deal. But with a majority government comes a caucus, I think, that feels a little bit more empowered to speak up if they feel that the Prime Minister has perhaps not done what they expected him to do. And I think that's something that some Liberal MPs that I'm talking to have certainly questions about. You know, who is this guy? And is this really what he promised to do? Because they aren't quite sure what the long game.
The fracture within this Liberal government is becoming pretty hard to ignore right now, right? I mean, there's obviously real tension inside the Liberal Party over this new direction on energy, especially the deal with Alberta and the pipeline discussions. Mark Carney's got one foot in the net zero, double the grid by 2050 box, and another foot in the build a pipeline with Alberta box. Now, it's actually funny because to Conservatives, it seems obvious that the net zero agenda is only a thing in Canada because the Prime Minister isn't invested in net zero, right? Like, they're pushing for something that we don't want, and then he pretends like a pipeline will get built because he's trying to please Alberta because they pay the bills in Canada and they don't want them to go to a referendum. They don't want this separatist movement to keep growing. Mark Carney is basically trying to have his cake and eat it too. And he's trying to please everybody. But in doing so, he's not really taking a stance. Even Rosemary Barton is pointing out that there are growing questions inside the Liberal caucus about leadership direction and whether MPs feel the Prime Minister is doing what he said he would do. They are not unified on energy anymore. On one side, you've got the Liberals who are trying to move towards pragmatism, acknowledging that Alberta's oil and gas, pipelines, and energy exports are still central to Canada's economy, jobs, and investment. I mean, these are the Liberals with their head on their shoulders. But on the other side, you still have a strong internal faction that is deeply committed to aggressive net zero targets, rapid decarbonization, and keeping tight restrictions on fossil fuel expansion. Stephen Guilbeault is one of them. And those two visions don't comfortably coexist. They don't coexist at all, actually. Because you can't simultaneously tell Alberta that you support getting energy to markets faster, which is not actually true because watch in 2020, 2027? A pipeline's not going to get built, okay? He's just trying to kick the can down the road, trying to make it look like he's the pipeline guy without actually getting a pipeline built. So you can't do that trying to please Alberta while also doubling down on policies that make long-term investment in oil and gas more uncertain and more restricted, and talking about doubling the grid by 2050 and putting all your attention towards electrification as a future, and we're going to phase out oil and gas, but we're also going to build a pipeline. And that's the tension now playing out in caucus. And what makes this more significant is that some Liberal MPs themselves are reportedly questioning the direction, asking whether the Prime Minister is delivering what was promised and what the long-term energy strategy actually is. What is it? What is their energy strategy? Because they're saying one thing and then doing other things. So from the outside, this might look like a unified announcement or a national energy plan, but internally, It looks a lot more like the party is still trying to reconcile two very different visions for Canada's future held within the party. One focused on net zero and rapid transition, and one focused on resource development, pipelines, and economic competitiveness. And when a governing party is split on something as fundamental as energy policy in a resource-based country like Canada, that tension doesn't stay private for long. It eventually shows up in policy inconsistency, delays, and mixed messaging to investors and the public. And what's even worse is that the Conservatives, we are all very united on this subject. Pierre Poilievre has stated exactly what he intends to do as Prime Minister, and he does not flip-flop. He is very strong on his stance on the subject of energy. He has not flinched. Mark Carney has. He's flip-flopping and not taking a stance here. Mark Carney in this situation is reminding me of Aaron O'Toole during the 2020 jab thing, where he wasn't really taking a stance. So it's like, if you don't take a position, a strong position, then the other guy's going to come and eat you up. With regard to energy, people want a government to take a stand on these hard subjects. Like, we want to know where you stand, and we know where the Conservatives stand, but we don't know where the Liberals stand. Do you feel like the Liberals have a coherent national energy strategy, or a political compromise trying to hold together a fractured position? Even on the news, even the mainstream media, they don't know what to think about this. They're like, what's going to happen with net zero? What's going on with climate? You know, they don't want a pipeline to get built. The left does not want a pipeline to get built. But Mark Carney, like I said, he's kicking the can down the road, trying to look like he's the pipeline guy, trying to lure the Conservatives over to his side. But in the end, it's never going to happen. It's never going to get built. If we want a pipeline to get built in Canada, if we want our oil and gas sector in Canada to be respected and opened up, if we want to be able to give people jobs in this sector, if we want to be able to export our resources to the rest of the world, to help places like China get off fossil fuels, if we want to sell our energy anywhere other than the United States, which is what we do right now, then we need a Conservative government in power, because they are the only ones who are going to do it. Everybody else, they don't want the oil and gas. They want net zero. And maybe in the future that will happen. But right now, people are suffering because of these policies. People are suffering because of the carbon taxes. The industrial carbon taxes is hurting farmers. It's hurting truckers. You pay more for everything because of it. There's just so many problems with regard to these mandates and these net zero policies. Like, what are you doing to help right now fix problems in Canada right now? They're not doing anything.
Welcome back. More Canadians filed for insolvency in the first 3 months of this year than in any other quarter since the global financial crisis.
There's a growing concern more households are carrying too much debt and having difficulty paying their bills. Here's Pat Foran and Consumer Alert. Pat?
Thanks, Pauline and Sean. The latest numbers are concerning because they show many Canadians are feeling the strain of mounting debt, inflation, and increases in the cost of living. The three main factors hurting budgets the most are housing, car loans, and the rising cost of food. According to the Office of the Superintendent of Bankruptcy, more than 37,000 Canadians either filed a consumer proposal or declared bankruptcy during the first 3 months of this year. That's an increase of 8.5% over the same period in 2025.
I'm not surprised by these numbers. We know that about half of Canadian households are living paycheck to paycheck, which means, they have no savings.
The Canadian Association of Insolvency and Restructuring Professionals says Canadians are carrying record amounts of debt. Many mortgages will come due this year at higher interest rates. Rising food and gas prices, along with other factors, are pushing some households to the brink. In about 80% of cases, clients choose a consumer proposal instead of bankruptcy, which allows them to have a fixed monthly payment and stops interest from accumulating.
Most of the time, they will pay less than what they owe. It's based on their budget and capacity to pay. And you keep your assets in a proposal. In a bankruptcy, you may lose assets.
Almost 14,000 people in Ontario filed consumer proposals and bankruptcy so far this year. That's almost a 15% increase over the year before.
The rate of increase in insolvencies is a lot worse in Ontario than it is in the rest of Canada because we are the engine of the economy.
Licensed insolvency trustee Doug Hoy says tariffs have been detrimental to Ontario and says increasing unemployment remains a concern.
There is a major disconnect between what Canadians are experiencing and what they're being told by our government. Our Prime Minister recently suggested that Canadians have apparently never had it so good when it comes to affordability and household finances. And whenever they're being pushed on the subject of affordability, the Liberals, instead of taking responsibility for their role that they've played in making the economy in Canada basically suck, they could say, oh, we know we haven't done a very good job and this is how we're going to make it better today. Instead of doing things like that, they say, well, affordability is the best it's been in a decade. Wages are rising higher, this and that, and blah, blah, blah. Like, it's always like, we're doing this, we're doing that. Like, they're basically gaslighting us, trying to make us believe that they're the best thing ever, that they're doing an amazing job, when we can feel that they're not. And, we would respect them a little bit more if they were honest, and if they were humble enough to say, yeah, we made some mistakes and here's how we're going to make it better. But they're not doing that. They're just saying, we're doing a great job. And I mean, they talk about affordability. Mark Carney says affordability is the best it's been in a decade. Meanwhile, this is coming from the globalist elite who has someone buying his strawberries. Real, true Canadians are looking at their bank accounts, their grocery bills, their rent, or their mortgage payments, and they're not seeing that affordability is the best it's been in a decade. Might as well just spit in all of our faces. In the first quarter of 2026, more Canadians filed for insolvency than in any quarter since the 2008 financial crisis. That includes both bankruptcies and consumer proposals. People actively are unable to keep up with their debt obligations. So what's the new crisis now? Why is it that so many people are filing for insolvency when, where's the crisis? In 2008, there was a financial crisis. What's the crisis now? Are they going to blame this last quarter on the 2020 world event that happened 5-6 years ago? Are they going to continue to tell us that we're stupid and don't have eyes or a brain and can't see that we have it so good? Everybody, you're just not seeing properly. We're just not feeling properly. Everything is great and we just don't have eyes. We don't have a brain. We just can't see that everything is great. That's basically what they're telling us. It's so laughable. How could they take us for such idiots? And this isn't happening in a vacuum. Household debt in Canada is already among the highest in the G7, and rising interest costs over the past few years have made it even harder for families to stay afloat. That's why people are not having families. That's why the birth rate is going down, and then they say, well, that's why we need more immigration. And then all these immigrants come into this country and bring their 10 kids. So Canadians are not having kids, but we're importing people with a bunch of kids into Canada. But just make things more affordable, and maybe people would be able to actually have kids, buy a house, live out the Canadian dream. We're not asking for much here. We just want to be able to have a good life. We just want to be able to raise our children on a safe street, in a safe neighborhood, in an affordable home. We want to be able to put food on the table without worrying about, do I pay for rent or my mortgage, or do I pay for food for my family? We should never have to question that. So when Canadians hear that things have never been better, better for who? Because for regular Canadians, like me and you, just normal people working and living normal life in Canada, it doesn't feel like stability. It feels like survival mode. The government just doesn't get it. They're not living in the same reality as us, and it looks like they care more about power and control than they do about the well-being of the people that they were elected by to represent. And Are government policies actually improving affordability in a meaningful way? I don't know, you tell me. Money, power, and control. That's literally all they seem to care about. And speaking of control,
one of the biggest companies in the world is publicly warning Ottawa that a Canadian law goes too far. And almost nobody in this country knows it's happening because it's buried inside something called Bill C-22, the Lawful Access Act. Nice name. Sounds safe, sounds reasonable, very Mark Carney-like, and to think about it, it's very well marketed. It sounds like something that goes after criminals. That's how these things always sound. But here's what it actually means. The federal government wants the power to order tech companies to build what they call technical capabilities. So law enforcement can access data when required. That means a way in, a back door, a key. And before somebody says, well, Tarek, if you're not doing something wrong, what are you worried about? You already have your Googles and your Alexas in your house. What are you so worried about? Because encryption is not for criminals. Encryption protects your banking, your health records, your business communications, your lawyer, your spouse, your kids. A locked front door protects honest people too. And here's the part the government never admits. There is no such thing as a back door only good guys can use. None. You build a door, you use the door, and that's it. Once that door is created, someone can come through it, always.
The internet service provider was ordered by the minister, not by the court, to keep all your data for 365 days without a warrant. You may not have committed any offense, but they want the internet service provider to keep it in the event that you've committed an offense. And that's not how our legal system works. And it's important to say it's not, well, people say, well, it's not the government seizing it. It doesn't matter. If the government is ordering another institution, or in this case, an internet service provider to seize it, that internet service provider becomes an agent of the government. And the effect is the same, which is a breach of Section 8. In that it's an arbitrary seizure. So we need to think about this very, very carefully. I think that I've made out a prima facie case that it violates the charters.
While a lot of Canadians are focused on energy debates and political tensions inside Ottawa, there's another piece of legislation quietly moving through the background that raises a completely different set of questions about privacy, surveillance, and government power in the digital age. Bill C-22 is being presented as a public safety and modernization measure. The government argues it's designed to help law enforcement and security agencies keep up with modern technology, encrypted communications, and online criminal networks. And on the surface, that sounds fine. That sounds reasonable. Nobody is arguing against stopping organized crime, T-word, and other online exploitation. But the concern, especially from us conservatives, is what kind of powers are actually being created in the process. They're trying to give themselves draconian powers, which, obviously, all they care about is power. Because when you dip into legislation like this, it's never just about the intention. It's about what they can do with it. How much power are they going to give themselves? They say, oh no, we're not going to use it, but you'll have it. How much access does government gain to private communications? What obligations are being placed on tech companies? All these tech companies are saying, heck no, I am not doing this. We're not violating our privacy with our customers. So what's going to happen? All these businesses are going to leave Canada and Canadians won't be able to use them? And once those systems exist, how easily can they be expanded in the future? And this is where things get really controversial. Like, we're already seeing pushback from tech companies and privacy advocates warning that parts of this framework could pressure platforms around encryption and user data access, raising concerns about weakening the privacy protections that everyday Canadians rely on for banking, messaging, business, and personal communications. Like, we do not want the government to be able to listen in, turn on the microphones on our phone and listen in without a warrant and look at what we're doing on the internet and listen to what we're speaking on the phone without a warrant, because that's the kind of powers that it will give them. Yes, law enforcement needs tools. Yes, public safety does matter, of course, but history shows that surveillance powers, once created, they don't shrink. They tend to expand over time, especially as technology evolves and governments change. They just want control. Like, do we really trust the current intentions behind the bill? Are Canadians comfortable setting a precedent that increases state access to private digital life in the name of, quote, security? Because that balance between safety and freedom is exactly where this debate sits. I don't want the government in my private business. I don't want them to have access to what I'm looking at on my computer and what I'm Googling. No, thank you. And they shouldn't have access to that. We shouldn't be giving them access to that, but they have their majority government now, so they're trying to push through this legislation that would give them massive powers in the name of security and safety. Oh, we're keeping you safe. It's always about keeping you safe. Oh, keeping kids safe. They don't need these kinds of powers to keep us safe. They don't. If you want to look at my stuff, you should have to get a warrant, because giving themselves these powers, it's just too much. They don't deserve those kinds of powers, and we shouldn't be okay just giving it to them. And the mainstream media should be talking about this way more. So anyways, that should be all for today, everybody. I hope that you like this episode, and I hope that you have a beautiful Monday, and I will see you again on Wednesday. Bye.